Can everyone hear okay, clearly? Brilliant, I'll get started. Well, good afternoon. My name is Erik Erskine. I have been working with Drupal for quite a few years. I work for a company called Anatech. We do a lot of higher education and local government websites based in Ireland. Although we've got people all over Europe and beyond. I live in Stockholm in Sweden, where it's a little bit cooler there than it is in Vienna. I do a lot of mostly back-end work, but I've also done other parts of Drupal as well, and a lot of migration and a lot of work with sort of content data structures. So this is a topic that I've sort of been interested in for a while. I suppose I should start by kind of saying what I mean by structured content, which I think is as opposed to unstructured content. I think it's really something of a spectrum. On the left here, we've got things where we have very specific pieces of information, and we need them to be in exactly the right place so that we can do things with, the dates. We can do things with a price of something. Over on the right, we've got much looser information, things that can essentially be. They don't have to be in a particular place. We can put them in a big kind of bag and say, here's a bunch of stuff. In between, we have something which is a little bit more variable. So again, we've kind of got the very, very presentational things, but then we've also got things like headings and links and tables. Now, traditionally, we would say that these things over here, we use fields to store that data. And these things over here, we would arrange in a WYSIWYG editor of some kind. And the WYSIWYG editor is very good at those things there. But even as we start to come through here, we can end up with some small difficulties. Even adding classes to a link or adding classes to rows and columns within a table, it can start to get a little bit tricky. If we come a bit further over, we end up with these sort of compound components. They're made up of smaller things, but they themselves are not really, they don't really have the same structure as these things over here. And then in this second column, we have bigger components. They're things that are generally smaller than a whole page or a whole node. They're things which have quite a well-defined structure of their own. Now, this presentation, I gave it the title of "Do We Still Need Paragraphs?", which is perhaps a little bit of a clickbaity title, but I hope not. But what I mean is kind of paragraphs. I think it's a very successful module. It's got 200,000 uses. It's battle tested. It's done well. I think it excels in this second row over here. I think that's its original use case, was for big kind of complex landing pages where you want to not work on the whole page at a time. You want to take one section of it and treat that as its own thing that you can edit. But I think what happens when you get a tool which is very successful, people start to use it in ways which it perhaps wasn't intended. And I think that in the absence of kind of perhaps strong editing capabilities over on the right, we started to see paragraphs kind of move over here, and possibly even over here.
So just get a quick show of hands. I mean, how many people have worked on Drupal sites with paragraphs? First of all, if you keep your hand up if you've had paragraphs within paragraphs. Okay. 3 levels? Oh, 4? Any advance from 4? Up there, somebody. Seriously, how many? 5. We have a winner. Okay. So yeah, and this is not a criticism of it. It's just that actually, if you're using something which is very kind of structure first and quite heavy, quite technical to do small things, and that's probably going to be, should we say, a little onerous. So I started to ask the question of, can we do small components with CKEditor? And so I have to excuse me because my notes have gone. So the question now really, what do you mean by small? And I take that to mean something that doesn't need to be its own entity. And then kind of taking that question on, we need to then say, well, what do you mean by entity? Why? When would something be its own entity? So I'm going to look at a few characteristics of Drupal entities. First one's translation. You can have an entity that has more than one language. It has an English version and a German version and a Swahili version. Translation comes in 2 different kind of flavors. On the one hand, we got what we call symmetric translation. We can describe this as a single collection, and each item within the collection has translations into different languages. So in this case, we got the same items in every language, but we translate each item. The opposite to that is asymmetric translation, which is where we have one collection per language. We have an English collection with a bunch of things in it. Then on here we've got a French collection with a bunch of things and a Swedish collection with a bunch of things. In this model, the things themselves, although they have a language, it's not really relevant because it's going to be the same as the language of the collection, of the parent that it's in. Paragraphs, and incidentally Layout Builder, which I didn't mention before, is like as an alternative. A lot of people are using Layout Builder now. Paragraphs pushes you towards symmetric translation. There are other sort of, and Layout Builder, there are other contrib modules that kind of add on asymmetric support, and there's a widget which is labeled experimental for paragraphs. There's an issue about asymmetric translation, which I think has, I looked at the issue for paragraphs with asymmetric translation. It had 250 comments, and at the end was "won't fix. Use the experimental widget instead." Which, and I know that that works quite well, and it's not a problem, but it's suggesting a bit of a pain point here of using using paragraphs and using a separate entity for a small component. Second thing about entities, they can have access control. So I can say, I want these people to be able to edit events. I want these people over here to be able to view comments. And I want to control that at an individual level. Also, revisions. I can say on an entity, I can say make it revisionable. And then each time it changes, add a log message to put in why it changed, or just keep an audit trail of what was changed. fourth thing is about having individual fields that we can query on and we can filter on and sort by. If you need a date, for example, we want to show me all the events in July, so we need a date field. We need that to be a date, not just the word July. So, it's all right. Is it too high, too low?
Better?
Is that better? It was a bit too close. Is that okay? Yeah. So I then started to put together a checklist, or to use this as a checklist to say, well, what are these small things, we'll call them components for now, what would be suitable to embed within CKEditor and what would not be suitable? And the way to think about this list is we go through these things and we say, does my component need this, need translation of its own, or can it just inherit the translation from whatever parent it has? And in many cases it doesn't. We can just say, well, I'll keep my little call to action. I don't need a separate language for my call to action. It can just be the same language as what's on the page. I translate the page, I translate the call to action. Same thing goes with revisions. Do I need to be able to copy my component without copying the parent? Do I need separate access to the component that's not the same as the parent? Maybe if your component is like an image gallery, I don't know, you might have different rules. But say if it was something like an image gallery and you say, actually certain people can see the images and certain people can't, then you would say, well, it does need this, so it's not a good candidate. I think I may have got a bit of confusion with the ticks and crosses, but if we don't need to do any querying, if we don't need to do any filtering or any sorting on anything in the component, then we can carry on. And then if none of those things is true, we have this little kind of blob, if you like, that it can exist within its parent. It doesn't need to, we don't need to do anything other than kind of fetch it and show it. So it doesn't need the complexity of an entity. And that goes for paragraphs and layout builder, anything else that does a kind of parent-child hierarchy. We are potentially making things more difficult than we need by including a separate entity. And if all we've got is these small kind of blobs of data, what we have is a document structure. It's not relational data at all. It looks a bit like this, just a thing inside another thing. And that's best represented as a DOM using HTML. And what we then want to do is kind of, however we kind of do this, we take the whole thing and shove it in one field. And it should make things easier. If we can work out how to manipulate this, if we can find a way to manipulate this, but still store it in one place, then I think we're onto something. So I'm going to say now, sort of unlearn what you've learned about formatted text, and this field in particular, because I think what the preconceptions people have is that has that's got HTML in it. But in reality, it's got a serialized document. Whatever we put in, whatever CKEditor spits out, we can store it in there. There's actually a precedent for this. So we have a media plugin in Drupal core. If we look at the database, if we look at what's persisted, we see that. Now, that isn't HTML. We can't give that to a browser and expect to see anything useful. So this is a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because what I was thinking was, CKEditor is an HTML editor, but it's not. It's just it's a means to manipulate some document, which gave me an idea that if we could define these small components, if we could define them as CKEditor plugins or whatever CKEditor has, then we could have a page that this has got I threw together a simple accordion with a card. We've got an accordion component and a card component. And what I want to do is have a means for the editor to say, rather than add a paragraph or a list or something, I want to add an accordion, and then I want to put text within it, and then I want to add a card and put that inside the accordion. And there are a couple of characteristics for each of these things. Whatever these components are, they have a bunch of properties. The properties would be something like the yellow here for it, or the title, and they are just this style here. They actually have no bearing on the structure that we're doing, and they don't really have any bearing on how CKEditor works. They're just sort of there. And then we have slots, which are kind of like the holes within these components. So within the card, I can put some text. Within the accordion, I can put some text. I can also put a card within an accordion. And some of these components will have one slot. These have all got one. Some of them won't have any. Some of them might have two, if I was doing a grid, say, with two columns. But I started to think, could we build an editor that looks a bit like that? So I started working on a proof of concept, and I have some objectives for it. Firstly, it needs to be a single editor instance. I didn't want to have an accordion with a body field with another editor inside it. Then I also want semantic data. So we talked about something not being HTML but being an arbitrary document. So that is no good. I don't want to put that in the database because it ties the presentation to what we're storing. But something like this is fine. And really, what my sort of a litmus test for that would be: could you easily write a script to get hold of the data and make sense of it? Second one would be to make sure that these things are easy to put together. So, like paragraphs is really it's really simple for building out these structures. You can throw together a few fields and you go in. You don't need to do any kind of fancy stuff. You can go into the normal kind of edit fields and forms, and you can use widgets, formatters. It's very easy to put one together. Likewise, the theming. So I wanted to use fields, and I wanted to use the same kind of templates for these components as you would do for a paragraph or even a node. And lastly, I didn't want to have to write any PHP code or have much knowledge, or even writing JavaScript, or have much knowledge about the internal workings of CKEditor. So I did come across this module, which is relatively recent, and it's just actually had a 1.0 release a week or two ago. This is about kind of 70% of what I was looking for. It didn't have the ability to nest things. It didn't have. You do need to write some PHP code to write the form, but it did kind of have. The concept was there that actually I want to kind of define a. One of the examples in here is a tweet. You can embed a tweet, and it does have the field for tweet URL. You put that in, that does get stored in, get persisted. You can edit it. You see a placeholder for the tweet, and when you view the page, you see the whatever the Twitter widget is at the moment. Yes. Yeah, I was trying not to have the mic too close to my mouth. Is that better? Okay. I got in touch with the maintainer of this, and there's work in progress to use single directory components, which I didn't really know what these were until this week. But they're the kind of flavor of the month now in Drupal core. But essentially a YAML file defining what properties are, and some twig and your CSS, everything bundled up. But there's work to make this module use those. It's not ready yet, but hopefully I can get. Hopefully what we're talking about today can be useful there. Crucially, when you use single directory components and what we're talking about today, the concept of a slot, where you can just define, here's my component and it has some stuff within it. I don't know what it has within it, but I'll just leave that open. So I'm going to get a little bit technical, just to try and illustrate some concepts that it would be helpful to know, to see how we might build that kind of editor that I showed earlier. Firstly, CKEditor maintains its model, which is its working copy of the data. There is a content module called CKEditor 5 DevTools. If you enable that, whenever you go to a page with an editor, you get this kind of inspector thing in your browser where you can see the model itself. It's a bit blurred here, unfortunately, but it will tell me I've got a root element heading to a paragraph. Notice they're not called H2 and P. It tells me everything that kind of how CKEditor sees the content that I have. The second thing, we've got 3 different HTML representations of, or maybe I should say 3 different string representations of our model. We talked about the Drupal media thing that we had. What our model is saying is that we have this entity with a particular ID, and it uses the widescreen view mode. That's the only information we have. There's 2 things, the UUID and the view mode. In our database, we want to store that. That's the first representation. But when the page is rendered, we want to show something completely different. There's a third representation as well, which is the fact that we're using the CKEditor inside a browser. So we want to have a set of markup that we see while we're editing. In this case, I think for media, it doesn't show you the the video itself. You don't really want things like the play button being in there, because you want to be able to drag and drop the video around. Play button will get in the way. So it shows a video placeholder image. CKEditor puts in its own stuff so that it knows what you're working with. So we have the model. We have 3 different ways of doing it. Next thing I want to share is how we get between those things. First thing is upcasting. This is how we get from saved data. We get a model out of the database. The opposite of that is data downcasting. There's 2 different kinds of downcasting. This is really what happens when you hit save. It's going to take that model, spit out a string, write it to the database. Before we get on to the other downcasting, we got the normal Drupal filtering. This has actually got nothing to do with CKEditor, but you take something from disk, which is we've looked at. You run it through the filter, and you get this. Then you can do the editing downcast is the HTML within the editor itself. Now, what you end up doing is writing a CKEditor plugin to define the schema, which is telling you what you have in your model, and how to get from these various, how to do the upcasting and downcasting. So I've got a quick proof of concept, the sort of how that's made up. I've got a component entity type. Despite having said don't use entities, I built one with an entity, which looks a bit like that. Crucially, it has no storage at all. So you can't load these things, you can't save them. They don't have an ID. You can't do any queries on them. If you try and do save, nothing happens. But we can use the serialization that comes with Drupal core, which will allow you to take this entity, whatever's in it, and turn it into a string. You can use whatever format you like. I use JSON. But the beauty of having the entity is that I could use normal fields, and I could use the twig templates and everything else that comes with that. I talked a bit about you have to write a CKEditor plugin. That's one plugin which is generic to components. And lastly, I've got a special field type to represent what is a slot, things that you can put things in. So we have 10 minutes or so for a demo, because I didn't have time to make a video when I finished this at 2 o'clock this morning. So what could possibly go wrong? Right. Ooh. Okay, so I have a page. At the moment, I put mainly text within it. But what I want to do is show you a couple of those components that were there. I'm not going to create a new one, because that would probably be risking things a bit too much. But I'll show you this. You don't want to go off script. I'll show you this disclosure thing, which is like an accordion. I've got 3 fields on there. I've got a title. I've got a Boolean to say whether it's initially open or closed, and then I've got this contents, which would be a kind of slot. So my form now has, I only want to show these two. I don't edit the contents on the form. So when what I'm going to, when you say I want to add a new accordion, you'll get a form saying what's the title and is it expanded. That's all you need to fill in, and then you fill in the rest of the text in CKEditor. Display is again, I'm just using normal Drupal fields, and there's some twig templates. So let's go in here. What's nice is you can go add a disclosure. I'll start with that one, impacted. Now I'd like to, it's got some debugging in there. What I'd like to do is put the title in, have the title visible, and have some better representation of what the properties are. But essentially, I take the properties, and then I've got this empty square, which is a slot. I'm going to take that text there and paste it in there. How's that looking? There you go. Accordion, the world's worst accordion, I think. But and let's try and add a card, which is a bit different. Again, I've just got title and the style. Put some text in there. And we got card. And edit that again. Actually, if I do inspect here and turn on it's a little bit small, but this is the CKEditor DevTools module that I was talking about earlier, which shows you that I have a component here, and it's a disclosure component, and that's the data, that's the properties which are serialized, and then this is the slot which says I've got things in it. So that's quite nice to be able to see that. What's nice is if I click on one of these things where the blue line is, this is what CKEditor will call a widget. Essentially, it's a thing that we can move around. We can do stuff with it. I'm going to move this card into here. That's going to move it up there. What's nice is undo and redo works as well. So I'll just change this disclosure so it's not automatically expanded and save that. And we've got a demo. Our card is sitting nicely inside our accordion. So that's kind of different to paragraphs, and it's different in that I'd say with paragraphs you have to do, I call it structure first. So you need to know, actually I want to build this component. I know it's going to be that component, and then fill it in. I think when people make a lot of these pages, they'll often be working from a lot of the time content is prepared in Google Docs or Word as a big text field. And someone starts by pasting that text in the editor. I think this workflow is more suitable to doing these small components. So that is it for me. Any questions?
Thanks for the talk. The question is, how long did it take you to build this proof of concept, and what's your plans for it? What are your plans for it?
I don't know. I don't have an exact time that it's taken me to get this far. It's been quite a long. I've been sort of pick it up every now and again. I actually heard a talk a couple of years ago that made me think this is going to be possible, and then I got stuck with JavaScript build tools and things, and kind of gave up. And then I think that like the following DrupalCon, the ecosystem had moved on and it was easier, and there were more sort of demo modules. That module that I showed was a big help. Actually, probably the most helpful thing was that module, because someone has done a lot of work before, which you can kind of have a nose around and think, oh yeah, I should do it that way. My sort of what I want to get out from it really is, I guess I'm at the point now where it's an interesting thing to demo at a conference, but there's a lot of work to be done to get to the point where you could reliably deploy this to 20 customers every year without kind of having a ton of support issues. So hopefully there'll be some I'm looking for some funding from somewhere to kind of do the rest of the hard work that needs to be done.
I have a question. Thank you for presentation. I think this was a really good and amazing tool. But I have a question about how we can update existing content, because with Paragraph we can just fetch it by type, and we can just save value what we want, save Paragraph and enjoy. But I'm not sure how we can do it here. If we have existing content and customer send request to us, please change behavior and change the value of time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Which is that if you say you add a field or you change a field type in a paragraph, there are ways to do that with entities. This is definitely making that harder, because you've got to take a string of HTML, you've got to unpack it and then do your change and then save it again. I mean, that's not impossible. What I'd say is that for most of it, you want to kind of make sure that things like properties are optional. Because then, if you add a new property and it's just not there, you don't want to fail, really. You just want to have some sensible fallback for that. Then I think it's just a trade-off, really. If you think I'm going to need to change the structure of a card or an accordion, yeah, I might need to write some code to kind of parse the data and do a change and put it back. I think having storing presentational markup in the database would be a no-no for that reason. Storing it in a kind of semantic form does at least make what you're saying possible, even if it's a bit more work. So
you're touching you're touching on it already a little bit, but my follow-up question would be, do you think we should maybe move away from this HTML-like string representation in the database and instead move to storing something in JSON that's perhaps closer to what CKEditor already does itself, to make this kind of manipulation in the backend easier? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say XML would be more suitable than JSON for document structure. It just sort of it kind of fits. I've got a body, and inside I've got a hero, and then inside the 3 columns I've got these things. That's more natural to do that in HTML, in XML than it is, or an XML-like language than it is in JSON. CKEditor's own internal model, when you view it, it looks like XML, but it's not. It's just a document. But yeah, I think this is kind of idea that the body field is HTML is a concept that we need to change. And we should say it's a document of some kind. Actually, databases are getting better at having, like, I know Postgres at least, probably in MySQL as well, has a native XML type. You can make a column and you can say it's XML. And it makes it easier to do queries against some. You can do a query based on like a XPath string. Yeah.
Can you maybe comment a bit? How is your approach with CKEditor different or similar to Gutenberg and Drupal Gutenberg implementation?
I haven't looked too much at Gutenberg in terms of what it stores. I know that kind of, at least on the editing level, it's kind of putting blocks in of a particular kind. So everything is, you start with a blank page and then you add a block, even if it's just a block of text. And then you add a heading. And I think that's how it works, isn't it? Okay. I didn't... Yeah, I didn't actually, unfortunately, I didn't get to research Gutenberg and how it stores things. So I can't answer really. I don't know if anyone else knows that. But, yeah.
So one thing that I like about paragraphs is that you can actually be very strict with your editors. So that comes into play. That comes into play if you have, for example, a design system. And with CKEditor, mostly you're very flexible. So let's say you have, I don't know, a video or something, and you can adjust the size, maybe in the CKEditor. Do you think, or let's take an image, do you think it's possible with a plugin like this to also have this strictness? So let's say I have an accordion, the editor is not allowed to add a picture to this accordion.
Yeah. In what I've done so far, no, you can go wild and put anything inside anything else. In a CKEditor has, if you write the plugin, when you define a schema, you say, I want to have an element called an image, and it can go inside this, that, and the other. It can't go inside these things. So you can put the restrictions that you need in there. It was easy to do it. If you had, like, I haven't got a single element called component, which, and I have to say where component goes. But if I had, like, I'd like to change it so it was component hero, component TTA, and then have some rules to say, well, you know, a hero can go at the top level, only at the top level, and not inside anything else. That would do what you're asking. Yes, it's possible. It's a bit further down the road, I think.
Thank you.
So I wanted to get back to the Gutenberg question because for context, I'm a WordPress developer, just having a look around on the other side of the fence, seeing what the friends Drupal community is doing. And I was very curious about this talk, and while listening to you, I was very surprised because you basically more or less one-on-one reinvented the whole concept of the Gutenberg block editor. Like step by slide after slide, I was like, okay, yeah, that's how we do it in WordPress world. Yeah, that's how blocks work. That's how you structure blocks. That's how you serialize blocks. So it's very curious. You should really look at that because it's basically the same concept. I mean, there are technical details in the differences in the details of the implementation.
Yeah.
But like the overall idea is exactly what the Gutenberg block editor is doing.
So I'm going to turn it around and ask you a question now. So does Gutenberg take like all the blocks and serialize it all into one big string? Okay.
And it's XML based, very close to HTML structure with some comments that add attributes. You can nest stuff like you do here. There's a server-side API to manipulate stuff before it goes out in the front end. So it's like pretty much what you just explained here.
So that answers your question.
It's very interesting to see that you came up with the more or less same concept on like coming from a different angle.
Any more?
I'm interested, and maybe like all others are interested to see some prototype on GitHub, for example. Do you plan to share this, at least the one with presentation, just to play?
Yeah, so my next task will be to probably write up this talk in a sort of blog post and include this code somewhere. It is very rough at the moment, but certainly, yeah, I'd publish it somewhere just to, or at least the ideas and the kind of this is how we do things. I think maybe the module that I mentioned, I'm going to hopefully talk to the maintainer a bit more and see if we can do some stuff there to make something a bit more concrete. As I said, that's kind of that's more ready to go, but it just doesn't. It does a bit less. So, yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week.